Captain Mira Rael's boots echoed through the hollow corridors of the command ship, each step pounding with the weight of a galaxy teetering on the edge of destruction. The din of the ship's engines, once a comforting hum, now felt distant, almost secondary to the tension creeping through every inch of her body. Her mission had started as a simple strike against an enemy stronghold, another chapter in the ongoing war, but what she had discovered in the last few hours had changed everything. As the leader of Task Force Sable, Mira had always been prepared for chaos, for combat, for death. But this was something else entirely. She had found the first signs of a weapon that could wipe humanity off the map. She adjusted the cuffs of her black tactical jacket, her movements precise. Her mind replayed the conversation she'd had with the intelligence officer earlier. "Captain, we've intercepted something big. The aliens have been conducting experiments on human genetics. And they're not just looking for weaknesses." Those words had haunted her ever since. What could they possibly be trying to manipulate in human DNA? And why? Mira's thoughts were interrupted as she entered the command center, where her team was already gathering around the hollow table, awaiting her orders. They stood in silent anticipation, their faces grim under the bright, artificial lights that filled the room. "Captain," said Sergeant Klein, his voice heavy. "We've located the target. They're right where we expected, but there's more. The enemy's defending with everything they have. Heavy artillery, shields, and—" He hesitated. "Something else. Something different." Mira's gaze sharpened. "What are we looking at?" "Not sure. We intercepted transmissions from their research teams, but there's a code buried in them. It's not just about military strength. There's something genetic." Mira's stomach dropped. She had already suspected the aliens were playing a longer game, but this confirmed it. "It's not enough they've wiped out our colonies. Now they're tampering with our very biology." Her team exchanged uneasy looks. Lieutenant Ramirez, one of the youngest in the squad, spoke up, her voice cracking slightly. "Captain, if they're targeting our genetics, what happens when they get what they want?" Mira turned to her, meeting her eyes with the calm that came only from years of war. "We won't let them." The holomap blinked on, detailing the alien stronghold, a facility buried deep in the heart of a planet's southern hemisphere, surrounded by dense jungles and harsh terrain. The map zoomed in to show heavily guarded perimeters, reinforced shields, and several layers of underground bunkers. "The mission's still on," Mira said firmly. "We go in, neutralize the threat, and destroy whatever they've been building. We make it quick and clean." Klein nodded, tapping the map with his fingers. "Any new intel on their forces?" "We've only gotten glimpses," Mira said, squinting at the data. "I'm expecting resistance, but nothing we can't handle. But something feels off. We don't know what else they're hiding inside." Ramirez checked her gear one last time, visibly anxious. "What if we don't get there in time?" Mira met her gaze again. "We make sure we do." The command center went quiet as everyone prepared for the mission. Mira felt a knot of unease twist in her stomach. It wasn't just the alien forces she was worried about. It was the unknown, the sense that they were walking into something far bigger than a military operation. She felt like she was being led into a trap. Yet, this was a mission they couldn't ignore. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The drop ship cut through the clouds of the alien planet, its hull vibrating as the atmosphere rushed past them. Mira glanced out of the small window, her eyes scanning the dense jungle below. There were no signs of movement, just a thick canopy of green, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. For a brief moment, the silence felt suffocating. Then the comms crackled. "Captain Rael, we're in range. Preparing to land in 3 minutes." Mira nodded, her fingers tightening around the strap of her rifle. "Acknowledged. All units get ready. We hit hard and fast." The squad checked their gear once more, securing their weapons and armor. They knew the drill. But there was something different in the air. An electric tension that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. The ship hit the ground with a jolt, throwing them all forward into their harnesses. The hatch slammed open, and Mira was the first to jump into the muddy terrain, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The jungle smelled of damp foliage and something more sinister. There was no sound. Not a single bird, no movement, just a thick weight of silence hanging heavily around them. "Stay alert," Mira said, her voice steady. "We're not alone out here." The team spread out, moving swiftly and silently through the thick underbrush. They came to the outer perimeter of the facility, a series of high-tech walls that hummed with energy. The gates were heavily fortified, but Mira had expected that. It was what lay beyond the walls that worried her. They reached the outer entrance, and Klein stepped forward, his hand hovering over the console. "Ready to breach." Mira's mind raced as she observed the structure. A large section of the facility was underground, deep in the belly of the planet. Whatever they were hiding down there, it was beyond military weapons. Klein pressed the button, and the door slid open with a faint hiss, revealing a dimly lit hallway. As they moved forward, the air felt colder, more sterile, as if they were entering a place that had never known warmth. The team moved through the hallways with practiced precision, but Mira felt the tension in the air, thick and heavy, as though they were being watched. A gut feeling told her they were walking right into the heart of something far more dangerous than just a research facility. At the end of the hall, they reached a sealed door with a biometric lock. Klein didn't hesitate. His tools were out, and within moments, the lock gave way with a soft beep. The door slid open, revealing a massive chamber filled with holographic displays, lab equipment, and a strange central table with multiple glass pods. Inside, various samples and biological data floated, pulsing with unnatural energy. Mira's heart skipped a beat as she approached the central display. Her breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just weaponry they were building. They were experimenting on human DNA. The holographic display flickered and came to life, revealing a fully rendered human figure. Its muscles flexed with unnatural power, its body outlined in vibrant, neon lights. "This," Mira whispered, "is what they've been doing." Her mind raced. The alien forces hadn't just scanned humanity for weaknesses. They had found a way to use human genetics as a weapon. Just as she absorbed the horrifying reality of their discovery, the facility's alarms blared to life. The walls shuddered as security forces closed in from all directions. "We've been compromised!" Klein yelled, his voice sharp. "Get ready!" Mira gritted her teeth. They had known the risks, but this? This was no longer just a mission. This was humanity's last stand. Mira's pulse thundered in her ears as the sirens blared, shaking the very walls of the facility. The lights flickered for a moment, casting eerie shadows across the sterile hallway. They had barely made it through the outer defenses, but the deeper they ventured, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary research base. What they had stumbled upon was far more dangerous than a simple military installation. "Captain, we've got incoming!" Klein shouted from the front, his eyes darting to the security monitors overhead. Mira's heart sank as the holographic screens displayed multiple red blips rapidly closing in on their position. This wasn't just a standard counterattack. The Wraithlords had known they were coming, and they were ready. "Take cover!" Mira ordered, slamming her back against the wall next to the entrance. She motioned for her team to spread out. "Prepare for a breach." Her mind raced. The discovery they'd made was monumental, a genetic weapon hidden in plain sight, but now wasn't the time for analysis. Their immediate survival depended on getting out of this facility alive and keeping the intelligence they'd gathered out of enemy hands. Klein and Ramirez positioned themselves on either side of the hall, weapons raised. Their footsteps were light and deliberate, but Mira knew the Wraithlords were too methodical to be fooled by any conventional tactics. This wasn't their first fight. As expected, the door to the lab slammed open, and a squad of Wraithlord soldiers stormed into the hallway. Their black armor gleamed under the flickering lights, sleek and menacing. Mira's instincts kicked in, and without hesitation, she fired, her shot finding its mark in one of the soldiers' helmets. The alien crumpled to the floor in an instant. "Keep moving!" Mira barked, eyes scanning the battlefield as her team retaliated. Klein's rifle cracked, sending another Wraithlord soldier to the ground, but their numbers were increasing. They couldn't afford to stay in one place for long. Ramirez fired 2 quick shots, her aim deadly accurate, but even she couldn't keep up with the wave of enemies rushing toward them. Mira's eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit strategy. The holographic displays they had accessed earlier flickered erratically, casting an ominous glow. She realized with growing dread that the facility wasn't just fighting back, it was actively trying to trap them. The air grew thick with tension as Mira sprinted to the far corner of the lab, signaling her team to follow. They dodged around corners and crates, staying one step ahead of the alien onslaught. But something in the back of Mira's mind nagged at her. It wasn't just the weapons or the soldiers. It was the feeling that they were being watched, and the more she thought about it, the more it gnawed at her. "They're playing us," Mira muttered under her breath. "What do you mean?" Klein asked, breathless, as he reloaded. "Their defenses are too precise. They knew exactly where we were going, and they've already started setting up countermeasures." She turned to face her team, her expression hardening. "This isn't just a military base. They're testing us. They want to see what we're capable of." Before Klein could respond, a loud bang reverberated through the corridor, followed by the distinct whir of a security door locking into place. The hallway ahead was sealed tight, and the only way forward was through the reinforced door. "Damn it!" Ramirez cursed, glaring at the barrier. "We've been boxed in." "Not yet," Mira said, scanning the area for any possible routes. Her eyes caught the flicker of an emergency override panel on the wall. "Cover me." She sprinted toward it, her boots skidding slightly on the polished floor. She threw herself into the access panel, her fingers flying over the controls. Time was running out. She could hear the Wraithlord soldiers approaching, their boots thudding against the floor as they moved into position. Her breath quickened as the system resisted her every attempt to override the lock. But she wasn't about to fail now. She pressed the final key combination, and with a hiss, the door slid open just enough to allow them passage. "Go!" Mira shouted, pushing Ramirez through the gap. Klein followed close behind, his eyes scanning the hallway for movement. They had barely made it through when another explosion rocked the base, this time much closer. The walls trembled, and the lights flickered wildly. Mira's heart raced. The facility wasn't just defending itself, it was collapsing. The building was on the verge of self-destruction. "We've got maybe 10 minutes, Mira said urgently. "We need to get the intel out and leave, now." The team pushed forward, navigating through the labyrinthine corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly. With each step, the reality of their situation hit harder. The genetic weapon they had uncovered, the very thing that could give humanity an advantage in the war, was also the key to understanding the true nature of the Wraithlord threat. What if this was all part of a bigger plan? What if they were just pawns in a much larger game? "Mira, we're not gonna make it if we don't get to the extraction point soon," Klein said, his voice tense. "I know," she replied, her jaw tight. She glanced at the data pad in her hand, still displaying the encrypted files. They had the information they needed, but getting it back to command was a different matter entirely. Every second they wasted here was a second closer to the Wraithlords succeeding in their experiment, whatever it was. The sound of gunfire in the distance reminded them that they weren't alone in the facility. The Wraithlords were relentless, and Mira knew they would stop at nothing to keep the truth about their experiments hidden. "There it is," Ramirez said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and dread. Ahead, a reinforced door led to a secure exit bay. But just as they neared it, a voice crackled through the comms, cold and commanding. "Captain Rael," the voice said, sending a chill down Mira's spine. Asterisk. "We've been expecting you." Asterisk. It was Therox. Mira's grip tightened around her weapon. She'd expected him to be watching from afar, but this was personal. The Wraithlord commander knew who she was, knew what she had uncovered. And now, they were playing for keeps. "This is where it ends, human," Therox's voice echoed, his tone dripping with disdain. "You may have found our genetic blueprint, but you will never leave this facility alive." Mira's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. This was no longer just a mission. This was a fight for humanity's future. Let's show them why they made a terrible mistake, Mira muttered to her team. Her voice was steady, but inside, a fire burned bright. The war had only just begun, and she would not lose. The countdown had started. The final battle was about to begin. The air was thick with tension as Mira Rael and her team sprinted toward the extraction point, the pulse of their footsteps in sync with the countdown ticking away in her mind. Each second felt like an eternity, each step a calculated risk. They had the information, but now they had to get it out before the entire facility collapsed around them. The emergency lights flickered, casting the hallway in a sickly red glow, but Mira couldn't afford to be distracted by the flashing alerts or the feeling of the ship's hull groaning under the strain of the explosions. Her focus was sharp. It had to be. The Wraithlord forces were closing in, and every corridor they passed seemed to narrow the walls around them, tightening the noose. "Keep moving!" Mira barked, her voice steady but urgent. Klein and Ramirez were close behind, their eyes darting back and forth, scanning for threats. The adrenaline rush was palpable. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore, they were fighting to prevent humanity from falling into the hands of a ruthless enemy. "How much longer, Captain?" Klein panted, his voice clipped as he kept pace with her. "We're almost there," Mira said, barely sparing him a glance. The exit bay was just ahead, but she knew that Therox wouldn't let them leave easily. He had his claws in everything, every plan, every strategy. He was the kind of predator who savored the hunt, and Mira and her team were the prey. Ahead, the reinforced door loomed, a barrier between them and the only safe route off this dying ship. Mira had seen these kinds of doors before, but this time it felt different. This wasn't just a locked barrier, it was a final hurdle, a desperate stand between survival and annihilation. They had made it this far, but the real test was yet to come. As they neared the door, Mira heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible hum, followed by the sharp click of an override code unlocking the door. Her heart skipped a beat. The system shouldn't have been activated. Not by anyone in the facility. "Move!" she shouted, instinct taking over. Ramirez bolted forward, stepping into position by the door, while Klein kept his rifle at the ready, his eyes scanning the shadows. With a sudden hiss, the heavy doors slid open, revealing the wide, sterile space beyond. A sleek, futuristic hangar with emergency lights flashing across its expansive walls. But something was wrong. Mira's senses screamed at her. The atmosphere was too quiet, too controlled. There should have been more chaos. "Where are they?" Klein muttered, his voice tight with suspicion. Before Mira could answer, a cold voice echoed through the hangar, calm and dripping with disdain. "Did you really think you could escape that easily, Captain Rael?" It was Therox. Mira's stomach tightened. The sound of his voice was like a slap in the face. He was standing in the middle of the room, his posture relaxed, but his presence was suffocating. Behind him, a group of Wraithlord soldiers flanked him, tall, imposing, their black armor almost blending into the shadows. But it wasn't the soldiers that caught Mira's attention. It was what lay behind them. The colossal hologram flickered to life, a towering figure of a human-like form, its body covered in glowing blue veins and intricate alien circuitry. The hologram pulsed with energy, as if it were alive. It was a grotesque blend of human and machine. Mira's gut clenched at the sight. This was what they had been working toward. This was the real weapon. Therox stepped forward, a cruel smile tugging at the edges of his mouth. "I must admit, Captain, I'm impressed. You've made it further than I expected. But this is where your story ends. This creation," he gestured to the monstrous hologram, "will be the end of your species. Humanity's genetic weaknesses have been turned into your greatest strength. We've built a new army, your own." Mira's eyes narrowed as she absorbed the enormity of what Therox was saying. The Wraithlords had found a way to fuse human DNA with their own technology, creating a new hybrid race. It wasn't just about weapons. It was about control, about eradicating humanity and replacing them with something else. "You think this will make you stronger?" Mira asked, her voice steady despite the rising fear in her chest. You've only created your own undoing. Therox's laugh echoed through the hangar, his eyes gleaming with twisted satisfaction. You truly don't understand, do you? This isn't about making us stronger. It's about erasing your kind from existence. When your own genetic code is turned against you, there's no escape. The realization hit Mira like a freight train. This wasn't just a war of armies. It was a war of genetics. The Wraithlords weren't just trying to kill humanity, they were trying to replace it. No, Therox continued, his voice dropping into a deadly whisper. You can either join us, or you can die with the rest of your kind. There was a pause, an intense silence that hung in the air, thick with anticipation. Mira glanced at her team. Their eyes were locked on her, waiting for her next move. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. But they still had one advantage. Mira's lips curled into a small, confident smile. I choose to fight. Without warning, she reached for the detonator at her side, her fingers pressing the button with precision. The sound of a countdown echoed through the room, a blaring warning signal. Get to the ship! Mira yelled. Klein and Ramirez rushed to the nearby transport, covering their retreat. Mira remained rooted in place, her gaze fixed on Therox. The Wraithlord's expression flickered, surprise followed by fury. You think you can escape the consequences of this? Therox bellowed. I know one thing, Mira said, her voice cold and fierce. You may have won this battle, but the war? The war has only just begun. The countdown reached 0, and a deafening explosion rocked the facility. The walls trembled, the lights flickering violently as the entire complex began to collapse. Mira didn't wait for the shockwave to reach her. She turned on her heel and sprinted toward the ship. Behind her, the sounds of destruction roared, as the facility, along with the twisted project the Wraithlords had been working on, crumbled into oblivion. Mira Rael didn't look back. She knew this wasn't the end. The stakes had just become even higher. But one thing was certain, humanity wasn't finished yet. The fight for survival had entered a new, dangerous chapter. And Mira was ready to lead it. Mira Rael sat in the captain's chair of the transport ship, her fingers gripping the cold metal armrests, her mind still racing with everything that had just happened. The ship hummed softly around her, its thrusters firing intermittently as they made their way through the debris field surrounding the wrecked Wraithlord facility. The mission had been a success, barely. They had the intel, but at what cost? Behind her, Klein and Ramirez were seated, their expressions just as grim. The battle was far from over, and they all knew it. We're clear for now, Klein said, his voice breaking the silence. He glanced at the viewscreen, watching as the debris from the destroyed base drifted into the distance. But this won't be the last time they come after us. We can't let them rebuild, Mira replied, her voice low but resolute. The data we got, if it's true, then the Wraithlords have the means to wipe us out, genetically. Humanity will become an afterthought, a husk. We can't let them win. The weight of those words hung heavily in the air. There was no mistaking it. The Wraithlords' genetic experiments weren't just a weapon, they were the key to their plan for domination. But there was something more. Something Mira couldn't shake. What about the hybrids? Ramirez asked, her voice a mixture of awe and fear. What if there are more of them out there? Mira clenched her jaw. The image of that colossal hologram of the human Wraithlord hybrid was burned into her memory. The thought of their own genetics being twisted into monstrous, obedient soldiers made her stomach turn. But she had no time to dwell on that now. The Wraithlords had already unleashed their experiment. Humanity had to respond. We'll find a way to stop them, Mira said firmly. But first, we need to get this data back to the fleet. They need to know what we're up against. Her words were met with a quiet nod from Klein. Understood. As the transport ship cruised through space, Mira's mind wandered back to the destruction they had left behind, the last explosion that had torn through the Wraithlord facility. It was a victory, yes, but one that had come with a steep price. She could still hear the explosion in her mind, still feel the shockwave in her bones. It had been too close. Too many lives had been lost for a single piece of data. We can't keep running from the Wraithlords, she muttered to herself. Captain? Klein's voice cut through her thoughts, concerned. Mira shook her head. It's nothing. Just thinking about the future. You're worried about more than just the mission, Ramirez added, her voice quiet but perceptive. About the people we've lost. Mira's gaze hardened. We don't have the luxury of grief. Not yet. They were all survivors, but there was a bitter edge to that word now. The war had become personal. More than that, this was about humanity's survival. And it had just gotten a lot more complicated. Hours later, as the transport ship docked at the fleet's flagship, Mira felt the weight of her responsibility settle upon her. The fleet commander, Admiral Kessler, awaited them in the briefing room, his expression as steely as ever. Captain Rael, Kessler began, his tone businesslike but with a hint of respect. We've been monitoring your progress. I take it you have something for us? Mira stepped forward, handing over the encrypted data pad. Everything we've uncovered about the Wraithlords' genetic experiments, sir. They're not just creating weapons, they're creating soldiers. Human hybrids bred for control. Kessler's brow furrowed as he accepted the pad and examined the data. This is worse than we thought. They've found a way to manipulate human DNA. Mira didn't wait for him to finish. We need to find a way to stop them. We can't let them use us as their test subjects. If they perfect this hybridization process, humanity could be wiped out. Replaced. Understood, Kessler said, his voice more subdued now. The question is, how do we stop them? Mira's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping to a whisper. We've got one shot at this. We need to find their main lab, wherever it is, and destroy everything they've worked on. If we can stop them from producing more hybrids, we'll have a fighting chance. Kessler nodded, but his face was tight with concern. You'll need support. We'll send a strike team with you. But this operation will be high risk. We're not sure what kind of defenses they've got. Mira looked around at her team. She knew the stakes. They had to act now. Get the strike team ready. I'm not waiting for another attack. The strike team was assembled quickly, a small but efficient force of elite soldiers and scientists. With the data Mira and her team had recovered, the fleet's tech experts had been working around the clock to decipher the Wraithlords' communications and locate their hidden labs. They had a lead, a shadow facility on a remote moon, deep within a star system controlled by the Wraithlords. As the fleet's ship jumped into the system, Mira stood on the bridge, staring at the cold emptiness of space ahead of her. This was it. The final push. Captain, Kessler's voice came over the comms. We've got a clear path to the facility. There's no time to waste. Prepare your team. Mira nodded, her resolve steeled. Understood. We'll hit them fast. The next few hours were a blur. They launched from the fleet, hurtling toward the moon, a blur of motion as the tension in the air reached its peak. The ship's descent was smooth, but Mira knew better than to believe in easy landings. They were walking into enemy territory, and they needed to be ready for anything. The transport's landing gear touched down with a muffled thud, and Mira's team scrambled into position. The moon's surface was barren, a desolate stretch of gray rock and craters. They moved swiftly, following the coordinates they had been given, their boots crunching against the dust. Mira led the charge, her rifle in hand. Every step felt heavier than the last, the weight of what they had to do pressing on her shoulders. They reached the facility's entrance, a heavily fortified bunker carved into the side of a mountain. The doors were sealed tight, but Mira was already in motion, her team at the ready. Ready, Captain, Klein said, his voice steady. Let's make sure this ends, Mira said, pressing the button to open the door. As it slid open, a wave of heat and energy surged out. And with it, the undeniable truth hit Mira like a slap. This was where everything came full circle. This was where humanity would either rise from the ashes or burn to the ground.